The Gen Zers own nothing. They don't want to own anything. Everything is a service.
I miss the days where when you actually purchased something, it was yours.
I just lost every single book on my Kindle, over 300 books.
Then I tried to print at my leisure and it was like, no, you literally can't use the printer unless you have a subscription.
Automakers want to turn this thing you drive every day into a moving subscription.
A new study shows Gen Zers have some finance problems, starting out with more credit card debt than previous generations.
But let this be your reminder, you guys, we don't own anything on social media. This is their app. They can at any time get rid of TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, your email. We don't own anything.
And ultimately, that's how you completely control human beings.
Welcome to the year 2030, where you'll own nothing and be happy, or so they say. That phrase is from Ida Auken, a Danish social democrat, who in 2016 envisioned a future where ownership is obsolete. In her utopian prediction, we no longer own cars, houses, appliances, or even clothing. Instead, everything that was once a product is now a service. But as 2030 approaches, this prediction that was once framed as a dream is now feeling more like a dystopian reality. Today, it feels like subscription-based models have taken over the commerce world, and with that, taken the rights to our purchases. From printers that limit the amount of pages you can print unless you pay a monthly fee, to Kindle's ability of revoking ebooks you've already bought, the age of ownership is rapidly fading. And as for Gen Z, well, these digital natives who were raised in a world where access outweighed ownership, they're now paying the ultimate price, the loss of personal property. In this new reality, control over our basic utilities, creativity, and even our personal history has been transferred from the consumer to corporations. So let's talk about it, how the erosion of ownership is infiltrating every aspect of our lives, and how Gen Z's future is one of impermanence. One of the greatest feats of late-stage capitalism has been the adoption of subscription models in nearly every aspect of our lives.
I hate that everything is a subscription now. Like, there are some things that are not meant to be a subscription. Why does it seem like every single business is now trying this business model? Like, I get you want to make money more than anything in the world, and I get there is people who are willing to pay for a subscription, but like, can we just not? Can we just not?
In the past, you used to have the freedom to make a one-time purchase to buy most things, and then had the freedom to do whatever you wanted with that item. There were no loopholes, hidden fees, or reoccurring charges when you could buy things outright. And whenever a new version came out, you had the choice to spend the money to upgrade or not because you were still happy with the product you had. The control was in the hands of the consumer because they got to pick what they spent their money on. And now, Gen Z, and well, all generations for that matter, have to deal with everything they want being behind a reoccurring paywall.
You know what I'm sick of?
What?
Subscription services for everything.
Yeah.
I'm so sick of them. I'm tired. Like, it started with streaming services and it seemed like a good idea, right? It was like, okay, cool. Instead of buying DVDs, I can just pay X dollars a month and I can get all these shows. Mm-hmm. But now they're starting to take away the shows and there's 900 subscription services for things.
Yeah.
For all these different streaming channels, right? And now I'm seeing that they got subscription services now for refrigerators.
Yeah.
For rich people?
Yeah, rich people be wilding out with their fridges.
The reason I feel like this hits Gen Z particularly hard is because they're the first generation to enter adulthood dominated by subscription models. For a lot of them growing up, they never had DVD collections or a CD player in their room or magazines that they wanted in the grocery store. Also, I can hear the boomers now telling me about 8-tracks and vinyls. I get it. I'm just sharing from my childhood. But because of this, they don't have much physical media to start their adult life with. Instead, it's $10.99 a month for music, $16.49 a month for movies, $3.99 a month to store your memories, $9.99 a month for video games, $9.99 a month for fitness programs, $12.99 a month for dating apps. The list goes on. When subscription models first came onto the scene, it was a welcome change from having to pay full price for everything. It took away the burden of ownership while still maintaining the benefits of media and services. For a small fee each month, you get access to media, applications, and software that you otherwise wouldn't be able to afford. No need to take on maintaining your equipment, dealing with repairs or damages or lost items. All the work is done for you, and you just get to enjoy the convenience of the product. I remember when Apple Music came out, it felt like a game changer because you didn't have to rely on that 10-second preview to show you what the song was and then pay full price for that song just to find out that the preview wasn't a good representation of the song and you didn't like it. It also meant that you didn't have physical copies of media cluttering up your house when you could just stream everything for a small fee each month. It really did feel like a move in the right direction, but as we've learned since then, there are some drawbacks to this model. One of the drawbacks being that every business under the sun is seeing the cash flow potential from these subscription models, so they're all trying to get in on it.
I think that corporations and politicians are failing to understand is how much people are getting annoyed with our current iteration of capitalism in the US. Think about the subscription economy. Instead of buying something and paying once, you are now being charged monthly for so many things, right? Or every single business having its own app. So in order to get something done, you need to download a new app. Both of these things are symptoms of shareholder capitalism, which is the idea that companies need to squeeze more and more money out of their customers in order to create more value for their shareholders, aka it's just the endless pursuit of profit.
Between movies, music, video games, fitness apps, cable television, phone services, cooking apps, educational apps, online magazine, finance apps, and everything else in between, the average American has 4.5 subscriptions and pays an average of $924 a year. And that is $1,000 you pay every year and will continue to pay every year for things that you don't actually own. And I am embarrassed to admit that I am just as bad, if not worse, than the average person because I do in fact pay the subscription fee to the Weather Network app. I'm not saying that my reasoning is justified, but I just want to be able to see if it's going to be sunny or not without being bombarded with ads on every inch of my screen. Sue me. I signed up for that $2 a year so quickly. But this is the perfect example of something that literally does not need to be a subscription. Like, what am I getting that justifies a yearly payment? And on that note, I did just get a notification that they're going to be upping their yearly fee to, I don't know what it was, something like $3 a year. And that just goes to show that those monthly subscriptions you're paying now are not a fixed price and they will continue to go up over the years. This means your $1,000 a year that you're paying now is not going to stay that way. And that brings me to the second drawback, which is that if you actually want to keep the things that you care about, like your photos, your music, your movies, your dating apps, hopefully not that one, but if you want to keep those things, then you have to pay these fees for the rest of your life. Think about that. You're only paying $9.99 a month for this vast library of media, but that's $10 a month for, say, 50 years with no accumulation of media that's actually under your own name of ownership. I'm just not sure if the math is mathing.
Everything, it cannot be bought. It can only be licensed on a monthly basis. And what happens is you never get to a point where like those costs trail off. Like those costs are forever. They're in perpetuity every month until the end of the universe. And that's something like your folks or your grandparents didn't have to deal with. Because back in the day, like, not even a house, but let alone other things you could just buy outright. Like, you can't just buy Adobe anymore. You have to join one of their subscription plans. You can't just buy Microsoft Excel software. You have to stream spreadsheets now.
Say you've been subscribed to Apple Music since they launched 10 years ago. That's $1,300 you've spent on music that you don't own. Maybe for some that's worth it, like if you're a huge music snob and you're listening to different music every day. But if we're anything like previous generations, as we get older, we will just stick to the music of our youth, therefore not benefiting from these subscription models. It's not like our parents are jumping on the new Sabrina Carpenter album, so are we going to be getting excited about the new Gen Beta? Is that what they're called? Gen Beta? The new Gen Beta pop star? I'm just not sure. I feel like at a certain point, we're just going to have a fixed library of music we listen to that we're overpaying for. I'm not saying all this to try and convince you to cancel your music subscription. I'm not going to be doing that either. It's just to show you that these subscription models are not made in the interest of the consumer, but of course of the big corporations that are trying to squeeze every last penny out of you. Something that is, however, made in the interest of the consumer is today's sponsor, Pair Eyewear. Now, Pair Eyewear isn't just any glasses company. They are changing the game in eyewear by offering high quality and customizable glasses. Their magnetic top frames are such a game changer in that they let you effortlessly change up your style without having to buy more pairs of glasses. They have over 18 frame options in various shapes and colors, along with over 400 unique top frames. Their website also has a virtual try-on feature that allows you to digitally try on different pairs without needing to physically visit a store. I'm wearing the Ella in Tortoise, which I feel like is such a fun change from my usual style. As you saw, I also got the black and the burgundy top frames to go with it. My most favorite part though is that they offer sun tops, so you can seamlessly switch to sunglasses mode. This one also in Tortoise. If you're also a prescription glasses wearer, you know the struggle of having to choose between being blinded by the sun or paying extra to get a second set of prescription sunglasses. And then even once you have those prescription sunglasses, they're such a pain. The struggle is so real when you enter a building and you have to take those sunglasses off, fumble in your purse, get your regular glasses on, all while trying to read a Starbucks menu and make an order. Maybe it doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but if you've gone through it, it's stressful. Like when all of a sudden you can't see and people are asking you questions, it's not a fun time. And this just makes it so easy to put it on, take it off. I love this. On top of that, they're also affordable with their base frames starting at $60 and their top frames starting at $25. So if you would like to try out Pair Eyewear for yourself, check out the link in the description and use code AshleyEmbers15 for 15% off your first pair. Thank you so much to Pair Eyewear for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back to the facade of ownership. The other problem, and arguably the biggest problem with subscription models, which I've touched on, is that with this adoption of digital media, you don't own anything. And people know this, right? Like obviously you don't own the entirety of your Spotify library just because you pay monthly for it. But it's more that you don't have any rights to this media even though you're paying. For example, your perfectly curated Spotify playlist can just disappear on you for no reason.
It's a full-time job and it's extremely time-consuming and it's not as easy as it may appear to some people.
Many people have complained about this, that their accounts got hacked and they lost all their music, but also if you violate the terms of service, Spotify can just delete your account. This actually did happen with someone, not on Spotify, but on Kindle. In the book, The End of Ownership, they share a story that a Norwegian Kindle customer lost dozens of ebooks she bought from Amazon. They simply vanished without notice when Amazon erased her Kindle, citing unspecified abuse of its policies. Our best guess is that Lynn ran afoul of those policies because she lived in Norway, a territory in which Amazon had not yet launched its Kindle store. But we can't say for sure, since Amazon never bothered to tell her. To be clear, she didn't pay with a stolen credit card, she didn't hack Amazon servers to get her ebooks for free, she simply made her purchases from the wrong country. After a worldwide spat of critical news coverage, Amazon relented and restored Lynn's purchases. But Amazon's technical ability and legal authority to take away your ebooks remain unchanged. And this situation is the same for all digital services you pay for. Since Kindle runs its software through Amazon, Amazon can send instructions to your Kindle at any point to change or even delete the contents. And this is the same situation for all digital services you pay for. So everything can be gone at any point. Technically. Even services like Amazon Books, where you're clicking buy now to purchase an individual book, you still don't own it. You're actually just licensing it. And so if you break any of the rules of these companies, like purchasing from the wrong country, but also like posting a negative review, they can just take your stuff away. This means that your rights to your media are not determined by how much you're paying for them, but by the 20-page document you agree to when you sign up for the apps. Another example of this was not from an individual customer, but from a singular book that was removed from anyone's library who had purchased it. Back in 2009, Amazon deleted the book 1984 from every Kindle that had it. Amazon did this because the publisher of the ebooks didn't have the rights to sell it in the United States, but it does raise the concern over your lack of control of digital media when, in comparison, retailers of physical books can't just come to your house and take your book back. And the sad part of this, like I said, is that these rules are incorporated in pretty much every subscription subscription service you pay for. If you buy a movie from Amazon or Google, that movie can just be removed if the copyright holder decides to. But also, if the Google movie platform just isn't profitable anymore, they can just shut the app down, and therefore removing your access to your movies. A similar example of this happening was with the Google Nest that was introduced in 2017 and then discontinued in 2020 because they were going in a different direction with their business. And because this technology is a software-based system, your product will eventually become obsolete as there's no software support. And this can happen with any technology that we take for granted as being here forever. Realtors might simply stop supporting their cloud offerings if they're no longer profitable, or they might go under altogether. A future without Apple and Amazon is hard to imagine, but so was one without Lehman Brothers, Enron, and Woolworths. And the fortunes of even the most highly valued technology companies are volatile. Just ask Yahoo, MySpace, or Apple circa 1997. So since filming this, the TikTok ban actually happened, which is a perfect example of how a major platform we rely on can just vanish overnight. While the ban was in the works for years, we didn't know if it would go through, and as the date approached, people realized that this meant that they would be losing all of the content that they had in their saved files. Not that it's the end of the world, but it still is media that you valued enough to save, like recipes, cleaning hacks, crafting ideas, but even more practical things. Like a creator I follow that's pregnant said that she was going to lose all the saved birthing tips and positions that she had in a folder. Like, yes, you can go download all these TikToks, but for a lot of people, they have thousands of saves, which is just too much to download with such short notice. On top of that, even when TikTok did come back online 12 hours later, which was quite the power move, people have been saying that the app hasn't been the same since, with speculation of increased censorship with the switch in political parties in the States. It just goes to show that these social media companies can change anything at any given moment, and we shouldn't rely on them to be the sole guardians of our content. Now, if this seems crazy or unfair that you don't actually have the rights to the things you're purchasing, it's because it kind of is crazy and unfair. So I want to give a little backstory on how we've strayed away from owning the things that we buy. What I've learned is that having the right of ownership over the things that you've purchased is not a given, but something that courts and Congress have fought for the consumer. Laws like the exhaustion doctrine were put into place to limit what patent holders could control over their products after the purchase was made to the consumer. Under the doctrine, once an authorized sale of patented article occurs, the patent holder's exclusive rights to control the use and sale of that article are said to be exhausted, and the purchaser is free to use or resell that article without further restraint from patent law. This is why when we buy something like a DVD, we have the right to loan it to a friend, sell it to someone else, make a new cover for it, or even burn a different movie onto the disc. Under the exhaustion doctrine, you are free to do whatever you want with your property as long as it's within copyright laws. Exhaustion is the reason we have used record stores and bookstores. It's the reason we have public libraries and eBay. It's the reason we can lend a novel to a friend and leave our record collections to loved ones in our wills. It's the reason museums can display their paintings and you can back up your software. The doctrine of exhaustion ensures that the original author or publisher cannot prevent any of these actions. The exception, of course, being if you were to photocopy a book and try and sell it, then you're infringing on copyright law. Unfortunately, though, that system that worked so well for us previously kind of got messy when we entered the digital era. With the adoption of media online, the lines got kind of blurry of what is or isn't infringing on the rights of the copyright holder. Again, with the DVD example, with that copyright law, you're not allowed to make a copy of your DVD, which is easy enough when you just have a physical version of it, but it's basically impossible to avoid when you're giving people digital media because computer systems make copies of files just from moving them around. For example, the RAM processing in our computers makes copies of these files that only last for a second, or so I'm told by the internet, but they still violate the copyright laws because of this. And so in response to this, companies coupled their copyright law with licensing to provide real protection over copying. And despite Congress eventually adding software to the Copyright Act, which protects both the copyright holders and the buyers, licensing has just become commonplace in the software world because it provides far more control over the usage of products. All of this I learned in the book, The End of Ownership. If you're interested in learning more about it, it was very interesting. I did not just know all this on my own. I am not a techie by any means, but I really did like the backstory. But what all of this means is that even with the exhaustion doctrine in place, we have basically no rights to our media because licensing is ruling the software world, and we sign our life away when we sign those contracts. And this is how we found ourselves with subscription models on things that probably shouldn't have them, like the Weather Network. And the problem doesn't stop with digital media, but wherever there's software integrated into a product.
Can someone please explain to me how it is legal that the Snoop company has introduced a subscription for existing customers? I bought my Snoop before they introduced the subscription model. I paid like $1,200 for my Snoop, so it was not a cheap purchase. And if I knew that it was going to be behind a subscription model, I might have made a different choice. It just feels like a bit of a bait and switch. Am I the only one who thinks this? Like, how is this fair or legal? It just doesn't make sense to me.
There's a big issue in the car market right now where some of the higher end vehicles are implementing subscription models to use some of their features like heated seats. BMW, I'm looking at you. Or John Deere tractor owners came to the unfortunate realization that even though they spent thousands of dollars on their tractors, the license to the software put limitations on who can or can't work on the tractors, aka only authorized dealers for critical repairs. Your choice is either to take your tractor to an approved shop, often at a great inconvenience and personal expense, or to essentially hack it, a violation of John Deere's mandatory licensing agreement, punishable by the company revoking your license for use. And it doesn't stop there, of course, like when Keurig put out their new machines that initially refused to brew any non-Keurig coffee, or when HP implemented their payment programs to use their printers. And no, it's not a payment plan for the ink, but for the number of pages you can print each month, when you've already bought the printer and the ink yourself. Crazy. It seems like everything is heading in the direction of taking the purchasing power away from the consumer and just extorting every revenue stream possible. Before we move on, I want to say this isn't to make you panic that you don't own anything, because you don't. But it's so important to have that awareness that even though you bought something, it doesn't mean you have any rights to it. And that is the future Gen Z has to deal with. Brought it right back around. We're seeing this every year that with each technological advancement, software is being added to things that never needed it before, like your fridges are now smart fridges. Your TVs, I guess, have been smart TVs for a while, but still, in doing so, your ownership is being taken away from more and more commonplace items. The next problem causing Gen Z to own nothing is the rise of the buy now, pay later platforms. Now, these platforms have been around for a while, but their usage by Gen Z has blown up recently.
Buy now, pay later companies are putting Gen Z into major debt. It is no surprise that Gen Z is the leading adopter in buy now, pay later apps, but 43% of Gen Z missed one payment in 2021.
Afterpay was the first player in the game, coming out in 2014, taking advantage of technological advancements and integrating seamlessly into online realtors' checkouts. When the pandemic hit, the increase in online shopping accelerated the adoption of buy now, pay later, therefore leading to the birth of other companies like Clara and Affirm. And as our world has only continued to merge with the internet over the years, we're now seeing buy now, pay later on most retail sites. But that wasn't the only factor leading to Gen Z's normalization of buy now, pay later. It was the rise in the cost of living that happened after the pandemic that only reinforced its use. As we know, we've been hit with inflation so hard, but Gen Z in particular, who are just trying to get their footing in the world, are now adults who can't afford even their basic needs. And so it was the combination of buy now, pay later being available on most sites, with Gen Z entering adulthood with this new, often 0% interest loan option, that made it normalized.
When they were growing up, a lot of them saw their parents struggle with credit card bills in the wake of the Great Recession, and they learned to fear interest, which they associate with debt. Enter buy now, pay later, which allows you to buy something, get it right away, and pay it down over time at 0% interest. Young people see that option at checkout and they think, there's no interest, this isn't really a loan, this is not the same thing as taking on debt.
But the problem lies in that buy now, pay later isn't being used only for essential items. Instead, it's being used on things that people don't need and really shouldn't have a payment plan for. Another factor in this is that young people are always the earliest adopters of new technology. And that's how Gen Z became the largest user of buy now, pay later, as adoption rates among Gen Z are expected to increase from 36.8% in 2021 to 47.4% in 2025. And this is not an attack on Gen Z for not having a fully fully formed frontal cortex or anything, but during these years transitioning into adulthood, you build the financial habits that you'll likely have for the rest of your life. This means that once you start using Buy Now, Pay Later, you're likely to keep using it. Notably, 80% of Buy Now, Pay Later users use the service at least every 6 months. To reinforce that, this means if you use it once, you are 80% more likely to use it again. What this means is that Gen Z is moving further and further away from personal ownership when they're living a life with a constant line of credit for everyday items. Once you pay one off, you move on to the next purchase that you'll pay off later. Now, as much as my initial instinct about Buy Now, Pay Later is to villainize them and call out people for having unnecessary debt, I need to restrain myself because it's not all bad. Like I mentioned, as inflation rises, Gen Z can't afford life because, mind you, they are living off their starting salaries because they're just starting off their careers. And because of this, there are so many stories of people using Buy Now, Pay Later for essentials like groceries that they otherwise wouldn't be able to afford. The thing about the Buy Now, Pay Later model is that they often offer 0% interest, and some of them don't even have late fees if you miss a payment. 60% of people use Buy Now, Pay Later to avoid interest, and 54% use Buy Now, Pay Later because they didn't want to use a credit card. This means that if you need groceries, can't afford them, but don't want to pile more interest onto your credit card, Buy Now, Pay Later gives you an out. The lightly regulated services have caught on because shoppers can quickly get approved for a loan at the point of sale with a credit check. So people who can't get a traditional credit card may qualify. And unlike old-time layaway plans in which customers pay in full before receiving an item, Pay Later customers get their merchandise right away. The problem lies when people abuse it. Maybe that's not the right word, but when they use it outside of necessities. Using Buy Now, Pay Later to purchase non-essentials is not a good idea, but is how a lot of people are using it. We see this in the data where more than a quarter of Americans have used the option to pay for items like clothing, electronics, and appliances, which is up 18% in the year. This is in particular what's dangerous. Stacking on different types of loans for things you don't need can get out of hand very quickly. Because you can make multiple Buy Now, Pay Later purchases through different platforms all at the same time, the debt can add up to more than you can afford.
Let my story be a warning. If you abuse Pay in 4, you will wind up in crippling debt. Yes, it's a tool to buy like couches and things like that. Like, yes, there are certain things where like financing, great, but it's never the ideal. And the reason for that is these companies know that if you have access to funds, you likely will spend. And studies have shown that the average purchase price actually goes way up with Buy Now, Pay Laters. My experience with Buy Now, Pay Laters, like Affirm, Afterpay, whatever, I was always in a cycle of pay back. Basically what would happen is I would rack up debt on my credit card. I would also rack up debt on a Buy Now, Pay Later. I would be overwhelmed by my monthly payment. It was more than I could actually afford. So then I would do a debt consolidation loan, consolidate all those payments into one monthly payment, but I never stopped shopping. Buy Now, Pay Laters are really dangerous because they convince us that we can afford things that we absolutely can't. All of these sites know that you will spend more money if you have access to a Buy Now, Pay Later.
It also doesn't help that Buy Now, Pay Later platforms may or may not be taking advantage of lower income individuals. I'm not trying to make any claims about these companies, but it is a fact that the majority of the users of Buy Now, Pay Later are people who struggle with money. Buy Now, Pay Later usage is notably higher for those with credit scores below 620 and those who are 30 days or more delinquent at some point during the last year. Now, I really don't want this to come off as an attack on Gen Z because that's not the point. I say all this just because Gen Z is giving up more and more of their personal ownership when they become chronic afterpayers. Yes, you are accumulating items over time, but these items are keeping you in debt, which therefore limits your purchasing power in the future. Speaking of debt, to add more fuel to the fire, Gen Z has a lot of debt.
I have a question. How much credit card debt are you in? Because for context, I'm 26, I've been working since 17, paying for my own shit, moved out at 18, have been independent ever since. And I have $10,000 worth of credit card debt. And I will be the first to admit that I'm not perfect. I've definitely paid off medical bills and like emergency vet visits and things on my credit card, but I've also bought a lot of dumb shit. But it's like people my age have $55,000 worth of credit card debt. Do you see how my eye is twitching? That shit stresses me out.
Compared with millennials at the same age, Gen Z has more debt of all kinds, including credit cards, car loans, and mortgages. Today's 22 to 24-year-olds are also more likely to be delinquent on credit cards and car loans than the generation before them. And with that stat, it seems really easy to point fingers and reprimand Gen Z for their bad financial decisions, which a lot of creators like to do in poor taste, might I add. And blaming Gen Z for their bad financial decisions isn't the move when they're just a product of the system they've been put in, a system that's made to manipulate people into spending money they don't have. I just don't think it's fair to put the entirety of the blame on Gen Z when it's the previous generations that made the economy what it is and started giving out credit cards to kids in malls. Doesn't seem right. So do with that what you will. This is not to excuse bad behavior, but we need to be realistic here. But back on track, besides all the buy now, pay later programs and the endless subscription services, it feels like around every corner, someone is pulling the strings to try and pry more and more money out of young people who don't have money to begin with. Starting off, we know that student loans are a massive part of Gen Z's debt. In fact, Gen Zers had on average $20,000 in student debt, 13% more than millennials. And then, like I mentioned, with the inflation we've experienced since 2020, credit card debt has skyrocketed as the cost of basic needs have grown exponentially. Roughly 1 in 7 Gen Zers are maxed out on their credit cards more than any other generation, according to the New York Fed. The ripple effects of that debt are also far higher than in the past, with the average credit card interest rates at an all-time high, nearing 22%. Generation Z has been disproportionately pummeled by rising prices, higher housing costs, larger student loan balances, and more overall debt than the millennials before them. To give a Canadian stat, because I'm Canadian and this is relevant to me, but the economy here is rough, and about a quarter of Canadians can only make their minimum credit card payments, and 22% are sinking further into credit debt.
To date, my credit card balance is $10,176.97 at a 24.74% interest rate. And again, with the coffee out, food out, shopping hauls monthly, weekly sometimes, I mean, just living so far out of my means and being so delusional about my money. And that's how I've gotten to where I'm at.
Another huge factor in the debt crisis is the inflated cost of the used car market. Everyone is so quick to judge Gen Z for buying new cars and financing them, saying that they should just save up money and buy a beater, but that doesn't really work anymore.
Why buy a $50,000 car when you can get one paid off for $2,500? Where is this $2,500 car? Because, like, if you can show me a car that is $2,500 and isn't crazy high mileage and runs and doesn't need a lot of repair work, I will buy that right now.
Cars have blown up in price to the point that it doesn't make sense for a lot of young people to buy used cars. Which sounds crazy when we were in our 20s, everyone drove used cars, and if someone was financing a car, that was like crazy. But that was also during the time when you could buy an okay used car for say $2,000, or you could buy a crummy beater car for like $500. Now that crummy beater car was super unreliable and did not guarantee to get you from point A to point B, but you were only risking $500 on it. Now for that same crummy beater car, you're looking at thousands of dollars. What newly graduated Gen Z kid, young adult, is gonna risk that much money on a car that's not reliable, even if they had that much money to begin with to spend on a car? And if you look to scale up a little bit on cars that are still used but reliable, then you're getting into the like $10K mark. And at that point, you can't afford any of these cars anyways, so why not finance a new car that won't have any issues for sometimes nearly 0% interest? I need to clarify, this is not a sales pitch to go buy yourself a new car. That's the last thing I want to encourage people to do. If you know me in real life, you know I'm a huge advocate for used cars and just buying with whatever money you actually have and can afford. But I'm also married to a mechanic, so that gives me an unfair advantage and skews my view on it. So take that how you will. Anyways, I'm just saying this all because Gen Z gets a lot of backlash for buying new cars as if it's just for the vanity of it all, when they can't even afford used cars anyways. But with that, we get to add cars to the list of things Gen Z doesn't own. Because with financing cars, it's the same thing with the buy now, pay later model. Once you start financing cars, you're more likely to stay on that train and only ever be indebted to your vehicles. It all accumulates into a life of borrowing things under the pretense that it will eventually get paid off, but often turns into more loans once the payments are done. And when you've only ever lived in a pit of debt, no matter how deep that pit is, it still is limiting your ability to acquire personal property. Because if you didn't have credit card debt, maybe you could buy a car outright. If you didn't have student loan payments, maybe you wouldn't have to use Afterpay. Debt is a vicious cycle that loves to keep forcing you further and further into the trenches. All these problems I've mentioned individually can be overcome, but it's the combination of it all that is leading Gen Z to a future with no personal wealth. No, a Netflix subscription won't prevent you from buying a house, but when you're spending all your money to rent things rather than buying them outright, you're living in a society that encourages more and more debt just to live a normal life, and inflation has skyrocketed so far beyond just making your coffee at home to save money. There's a problem there.
Now, I'm not afraid of death at all. In fact, I can't wait to die. Honestly, I cannot wait to die.
Gen Z are paying 31% more for housing than their counterparts were a decade ago after adjusting for inflation. Spending on car insurance by people 16 to 24 more than doubled between 2012 and 2022, while health insurance spending for that same age group is 46% up after inflation. It's not just Gen Z complaining. Things are very difficult financially for them right now. And it's kind of a sick joke that Gen Z, the generation that has the most debt of them all, can't even afford to get the one arguably good type of debt, which is a mortgage. It's crazy that this is the first generation of primarily home renters. Even when adjusted for inflation, today's youngest adults will spend more on rent in their lifetime than their predecessors. Members of Gen Z will spend on average $226,000 on rent before ever owning a home. And a lot of news media loves to tell Gen Z that it'll all be okay. Once the greatest wealth transfer in history happens, you'll be set. But in actuality, boomers aren't going to pass down all of their money to Gen Z. A lot of them are just going to spend it on retirement. And like rightfully so, you know, like why should Gen Z have to rely on the previous generation giving them a bunch of money just to afford housing? Like what kind of a reality are we living in? Because things like rising cost of living for seniors too, the rising cost of healthcare, and also there are a lot of boomers who never actually saved for retirement and are using their housing as their retirement fund. So I don't know where this is coming from, people saying that Gen Z will be fine. And I do want to say, of course, there are still some cities out there that are affordable enough for Gen Z to buy housing, but I remind you that I do live in one of the most expensive cities for housing, so I have strong opinions on it. But even for those more affordable areas, it is no longer a guarantee that if you work a 9-to-5 job that you'll just be able to buy a house. Now, with all that in mind, if we look at the big picture of Gen Z's future, it's not really looking that good. A life of ever-rising rental prices, every purchase being a buy now, pay later model, the continuous subscriptions, draining bank accounts, all while struggling to keep up with the cost of living and putting food on the table. At that point, you really don't own anything, and so you don't have any personal wealth.
Average millennial is 36 years old. They can't afford to buy the house. So therefore, their future self is poorer. If they think of how much of the stock market they can buy less with their money. They have less savings. They've got debts from university. So they don't have the ability to get out of this trap. And then what you're finding is because of this, they're having to live with other people into their 30s. They don't have kids and they don't get married. You see then the same cohort of kids in their 30s doing 2 jobs, 3 jobs, 4 jobs. That's not because they want to. Nobody wants to work 12-hour days, 7 days a week. It's because they have to. And their parents, the baby boomers, never had that. They were the richest generation the world had ever seen. So this is the first generation that won't be as rich as their parents.
Obviously, this is worst case scenario, and you can still build wealth by just literally putting money into a savings account, despite this situation. But for a lot of people, they are living in this worst case scenario. So what are they supposed to do? Another thought on the matter that's really interesting to look at is where the push for these subscription models even came from. While there are, of course, the financial incentives from these corporations to get more money from us, there's also incentives on our end to sign up for them. All these services that claim to make our lives easier are only making our lives easier because we've shifted into an individualized society. If we lived with a village mentality, we wouldn't need ride-sharing apps when we could just borrow someone else's car. We wouldn't need meal delivery kits when we could have a community dinner every week where we share the load of making meals. We wouldn't need movie subscriptions if we could just browse someone else's DVD collection and pick whatever looked interesting. I'm talking about DVDs a lot. I don't own any DVDs DVDs, but maybe I should start getting some. Of course, subscription services do offer a wider variety of options than just a community of people would have, but we've also done it that way for centuries without issues. The point being that it's as if these corporations are trying to manufacture a village for us to profit off of and provide the support that we're not getting from a culture that prioritizes individualism. And so the more we use these services, the less we need others, and the further we pull from community, therefore the more we rely on these services. Okay, final thoughts. What to say? I feel like some of you might think that I'm a pessimist based on the topics I've been covering lately, which I'm not. Maybe I'm not an optimist, but I'm not a pessimist. It just, how can you not feel like the world is burning right now? And with that, the most important thing we can do when we feel like so much is out of our control is to stay informed so that when we make decisions, at least we have all the facts in front of us. So in situations like these, when companies are trying to convince you to sign up for their $5 subscription, you at least have the awareness to know that these subscriptions do add up fast, so you should be very picky with what you subscribe to. Like my channel, for that matter, which is a free subscription, and I encourage you to do so now. I put out these video essays once a month, and I would hope that you don't want to miss it. But moving on, it's so important to know your rights with media, so you can make the choice of what you're okay essentially renting or licensing, and what is important enough to you that you do want to own. As for Gen Z specifically, I do feel a lot of helplessness in this situation with the larger issues like the housing crisis and the debt crisis, and I don't really know what to do about that moving forward. It feels like so much of this is out of our hands, and we really need the people in power to give Gen Z the opportunity to thrive. Give them affordable housing, let them own the things they buy, and for the love of God, let me pay outright for the ad-free version of the Weather Network. But that's all I have for now. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. I will catch you next month for another video essay. Bye.
I really wish that I could unsubscribe from this life. I don't own anything but pay the price every time. It's all this interest, but it's not of mine, not of mine. It's safe to say that it's paid to